Some plus points on the test sheet. Yeah, I'm just going to give you a series of comments now. We'll be working for just a few moments talking about Virgil's Aeneid, but I want to make some observations in general, specifically about what you wrote about in your papers, and namely this notion of the trip to the underworld. So let's go through this real quickly as we're getting ready for the exam we're about to take. I want to begin with a quote, a famous Joseph Stein quote, "Those who wander are not necessarily lost." Of course, when he wrote this line, he had to have been thinking about the two greatest of wandering heroes, right? Odysseus and Aeneas. Those who wander are not necessarily lost. And those of us who enjoy traveling of any kind, this is, of course, a pretty useful mantra for us as well. I want to point out some observations about this trip to the underworld motif, as we'll often refer to it. It's such an important one going forward in the study of the literature that we'll be looking at. It's one of the reasons why I want to take your time now and point it out. Notice that we're talking Aeneid 6 and Odyssey 11, right? We call it often, this motif, the journey within the journey. That is to say, notice you've got multiple examples of this, obviously the Odyssey and the Aeneid, but let's just reference two at 3a as well. Dante's Inferno, the first part of what will be referred to as the Divine Comedy. The Inferno is a journey into the underworld. And as well, Conrad in the 20th century will write one of the classic novellas that we'll read in the second semester called Heart of Darkness, which involves a journey as well. It is a physical journey, not a mythic journey to an underworld, but in his presentation, he clearly has in the back of his mind those three classic texts, the Odyssey, the Aeneid, and as well, of course, Dante's Divine Comedy. Notice the juxtapositions, right? So, for example, where does the story take place? Book 6 of the Aeneid of 12 books. Book 11 of the Odyssey of 25 books. So I want to point out that specifically, intentionally, it's always at the halfway mark, correct? Of the epic poem. At the halfway mark, you've got this journey into the underworld, right? And now what do we want to say about this? Well, obviously, as you said in your papers, there's some similarities here. For example, the ticket to ride, we might call it, what it is that allows you to get in. Notice in the Odyssey, it's that combination of blood and honey, etc. Notice in the Aeneid, it's that kind of special branch. It's also involving blood. Why is this so important? Because the place is special. That is to say, there are rules there in the underworld, and you have to know the rules and play by the rules, or things don't go very well. The eschatology of hell, that is to say, the construction of hell, the afterlife, notice, will continue to have resonances through literature coming forward. So, for example, notice that we have both Odysseus and Virgil, as well as in Dante's Inferno. Make a note to yourself that in Dante's Inferno, he has to have a guide to get him through hell. That guide for Dante will be Virgil. Okay. We should also point out that in the Aeneid, you find that hell is a place of no hope. And this is the key. It is a hopeless place. Later, he'll call it a place of shades. And you'll want to make a reference here at 3a that this is exactly what Conrad calls it, a similar kind of situation in the famous grove scene, as we'll refer to it in Heart of Darkness. Let's also point out that in hell, not only is there action, but there are speeches. And these speeches are obviously very, very important. They're always didactic. They're always apropedeutic. They're inclined to teach something. And a number of you pointed this out in the papers that you wrote. Notice, for example, as well, there's important moments that qualify and somehow lead to some kind of an epiphany by the heroes themselves. Odysseus, of course, will meet there his mother. He'll meet Achilles. Remember what Achilles says, "I'd rather be a live dog than a dead lion." A line that, by the way, Socrates has real problems with in the Republic, as we'll talk about later. Aeneas, of course, will meet there his father, and of course the famous scene where he meets the jilted lover Dido, and she turns her back. Dante as well will meet lots and lots of famous people in the underworld. And he'll hear these speeches that will be given. Of course, there are significant moments as well for each one of these in terms of getting out. Hell is not a place that they want to go to. They want to escape it in some way. But when they escape it, they are changed people. Notice they're different. Odysseus is a different cat once he comes out and he's told by Tiresias, when you go home, it's not going to be a pretty picture for you. You're going to have all kinds of issues. Men there are waiting to try to kill you. Notice that in the speech, it's a fairly long one, that his father gives to Aeneas, he will in fact tell him what great things are coming in regards to the Roman people. This is Virgil's way to kind of say that the rise of the great Roman Empire was all kind of planned from the start. And Aeneas knew it. He saw it. He was told about it. Of course, this is all kind of mythical, right? Notice that in some ways then, hell and the underworld becomes a metaphor of sorts. Now we should point out that both the Greeks and the Romans didn't believe in hell as a place where only certain people go. Everyone dies and goes to Hades if you're Greek. Okay, everyone dies and goes to Hades. There's no such thing as a heaven-hell dichotomy in the understanding of both Homer as well as Virgil. But by the time Dante writes Divine Comedy, this notion that we of course equate with Christian theology of this split between a place of punishment in eternity that we call hell and a place of forever paradise that we call heaven, that kind of thing will be there for Dante. Finally, there's notions that we would call modern notions of hell. One of those is to say, is to talk about Jean-Paul Sartre's classic, No Exit. This is a play that Sartre, the great existentialist writer, will create in the 20th century. The scene opens with one man and two women stuck in a room. It takes the audience a while to figure out that all three of them are dead and have just woken up from their death. And here they are, dressed just like they normally were dressed, in a nice living room. And the man looks around and he's like, I'm dead? And this is my afterlife? Stuck in a room with two women. Yes, kind of like a Bud Light commercial, yes. But it doesn't take him long to start figuring it out. Stuck in a room with two women, and there's no getting out. Of course, the two women are stuck in a room with one man. At one point, the line becomes a famous line from the play, hell is other people. The idea is that you don't have to be tortured to try to imagine hell. It's bad enough to just be with other people. Made even more complicated, they try the handle on the door and it opens. The door opens. They're not stuck in the room. Outside of the room is a long dark hall. Choice, do you leave? Could get worse. Could be these terrible things like Dante described about hell in the afterlife. Here it's not that bad. Which is to say, sometimes hell is nothing more than simply settling for what you're stuck with. Interesting idea. There's another view of hell that will be played through time. We'll come back to all of these as our course unfolds. One is to imagine that you don't go to hell, as in a geographic location, but rather you go through hell. Now, this idea says that human existence is fundamentally hell-like. Dante will seem to kind of play this game so well that T.S. Eliot will pick up on it. And many writers will, in fact, kind of say it this way. Try to imagine the worst imaginable place that you could ever be stuck to have to live, and it would actually be this world. And all the terrible things that happen in this world. No place could be any worse, no hell could be contrived to be any worse than the very thing that you call existence itself. This, by the way, gives rise to another kind of view, and it runs something like this. Most of us work off of the assumption that we're now living, and that we someday will die, and that after our death there's this thing called an afterlife, where there's this thing called potentially hell. Question, what if that's true, but what if you've already lived your life? You already did it. You lived it, you died, and this is your afterlife. This thing we call living in a small town in the middle of nowhere, Orland, Wyoming. See, this is your hell. This is it. Some of us will say, yeah, I felt that before. I know what that means. This is your afterlife. This is whatever is supposed that you want to define it as, heaven or hell, depending. Right? There will be all kinds of references to hell as we start to play the game. One of the interesting things about picking up a Judeo-Christian Bible and reading it is how few references there are to hell. and how far you have to get into that volume before there's even a mention of hell at all. It's a fascinating thing to kind of come to this, because oftentimes people equate the notion of hell with their religious practices or other people's religious practices. And so we'll want to pay attention to the way that hell gets referenced and used. Notice it's called the underworld in both of the two texts that we're referencing. Okay? Finally, we should point out that we know that these heroes will be fundamentally different, and yet they're going to survive. In other words, the idea is, if you can get through this experience, you can get through any experience. Of course, the great philosopher Nietzsche would play it out this way: that which does not destroy me makes me stronger, an oft-quoted line by Nietzsche. And of course, he borrows this idea directly from the Greeks and the Romans. Their epic heroes have to go through hell so that they can know that they will be fine on the other side. In other words, you know that Odysseus is going to be okay at the island of Ithaca once he gets out of hell. You know that that Aeneas is going to be okay, and he's going to make it through all these different battles. If you're a person reading the poem, you kind of know that. Why? Because he made it through the experience of hell. As we go forward then, we want to pay particular attention to the ways that writers kind of think about and understand the notion of hell and the afterlife, and the experience of surviving that notion of afterlife. Thank you. Let's now